When you air seal and insulate, it's one of the biggest ways to reduce the heating and cooling load of your house. So if you have more insulation in your attic, your house is going to stay warmer longer in the winter, and it's going to stay cooler longer in the summer.
I think we as a society would benefit from being more knowledgeable about systems in our home and how they all interact and what the cost implications and health implications of all these things are. I think that's really valuable information for people to understand, and it can be empowering.
Welcome to Building Well, Sustainable Homes, Equitable Communities, your new podcast from New Ecology. Join us as we explore real-life stories from key players in green building and community development. We'll examine exciting new innovations, highlighting practical solutions for creating more affordable, healthier, more resilient, equitable communities. We're building well together.
This episode was made possible by the Mass Save Community Education Grant.
Welcome to the Building Well podcast. I'm Michelle Moran, one of your hosts, and I'm here today with my co-host, Alina Michaelevich.
Hello.
We have a very exciting episode for you today. It's a little out of the ordinary for this podcast, and I think we're all going to have a lot of fun. A little background first. At New Ecology, like at many workplaces, the lunch table is the hotspot for lively discussions and problem solving, and we do both personal and professional projects alike. It's where our new and innovative ideas are born. I mean, where else can you find a table full of experts? So that's the spirit we wanted to bring to you all today with our very first call-in style question and answer episode. Over the past few weeks, I've been gathering questions about buildings and energy efficiency from New Ecology staff, and today they will finally be getting some answers. So let me introduce our star guests today. We have Rebecca Arnold, project manager, and Alex Howarth, senior energy rater. Welcome.
Welcome, Alex and Rebecca. We're so excited to have you guys on. Every time I talk to you, it's such a delight. So this will be a great episode. Could you start by introducing yourselves, your career background, and what you do at New Ecology?
Sure. My name is Rebecca Arnold. I am a project manager at New Ecology. My professional background is I started in construction and construction management in Baltimore City, renovating row homes with Habitat for Humanity. While I was doing that, I was lucky enough to get a chance to do some energy efficiency upgrades on those row homes. And I learned a lot, and it really inspired me to learn more about how to do the best possible job at construction. I saw my first blower door test. I saw my first infrared scan. And from there, I moved into more energy efficiency work, everything from working for an insulator to doing energy audits. And now I'm at New Ecology doing a whole variety of things, everything from existing buildings to new builds.
Cool. Thanks, Becca. Not too dissimilar, but I found my way into this industry out of college not long after. I'm dating myself, but not long after the 2008 financial crash and the federal stimulus package that incentivized changes and adaptation and expansion of state weatherization programs, which, if you're not familiar, are services targeting low income, primarily homeowners, to make durability and energy efficiency upgrades to their home. Those programs have been around since the 1970s, since the first oil crisis, and a lot of building science emerged out of that industry. So that began in the Pacific Northwest. I was working in a rural setting in and around tribal communities, reservations, a lot of rural poverty. I had been interested in housing issues prior to doing this, but it opened my eyes to the kind of endemic issues facing housing throughout the country and started to get an interest in building science. Moved back to the East Coast, to Baltimore, Maryland, where I still live, and kind of built on that work, working for the Office of Sustainability, doing a lot of community outreach, this time in an urban setting, and then realized that there's so much technical expertise that I wanted to gather. And so ended up joining an energy auditing company where I became certified as a BPI professional. And it kind of built from there. I've worked on a lot of market rate and low income single family existing housing programs. Somewhere along the way, I started to realize that I really desired to work on new construction because I saw it as an opportunity to do things right from the get-go, design out flaws that I see in existing buildings. And so, I was kind of looking for that kind of opportunity to move from existing buildings to new construction. When the opportunity at New Ecology came along, what's been great about being here is that I get to do a little bit of both. I still get to work on existing buildings and new construction. So Rebecca and I have, we've been in similar spaces for over a decade.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you both for being here today. We're so excited. So I'm going to open up the call-in. Our first category is hazards or safety questions. And our first person asking a question is our very own Alina.
My question is about knob and tube electrical. So we went through a home energy assessment and we couldn't do some of the recommendations because we have knob and tube in our house. And I got some quotes from electricians for mitigating it. And one electrician actually said it's not that dangerous and like maybe don't worry about it that much. And I was like, interesting. So I'm curious your perspective on the danger of having knob and tube in an old home.
So your house probably won't burn down tomorrow. It's a functional system that has worked for a long time, and it could continue to work a long time. And it doesn't incorporate most of the modern electrical requirements that you would want in your house today and all of the upgrades to electrical code. Its fragility will prevent you from being able to do a lot of things, not just energy efficiency upgrades. When you want to upgrade some of your electrical appliances, for example, it's harder for the knob and tube to handle those loads. And whenever anyone messes with your house, so if someone has to walk through your attic or someone has to do work in your basement, that knob and tube is very easily damaged. And that's when it becomes dangerous. So knob and tube in its original form, functioning today, is not as safe as modern wiring, but it is also very fragile and so much more likely to be damaged and cause problems in the future.
Definitely something I've seen a fair amount of in and around Baltimore, where we have a lot of historic homes, row homes, and also old Victorian houses. I would just highlight other things to maybe be concerned about. Oftentimes, those systems remain in part. Like if your home has been updated piecemeal, hopefully there's a known junction where that is tied into back to the panel. But oftentimes you see unsafe splices and things like that. I don't know if all knob and tube always had cloth coating. I don't want to misspeak here, but I think it often did. But this wiring was installed at the latest in the 1940s, and that material is almost certainly degraded at this point. And so again, if it's static and stable, it may not be in danger of shorting or overheating, but like any kind of disturbance could potentially eventually cause an issue. Any type of system in a home that's lasted going on 70 years is probably due for an update. And of course, it can be a relatively expensive update to make to your home. Potentially, there's other opportunities like looking at updating your service if you have a goal for long-term electrification, and maybe it's good to kind of think about those things in conjunction. It's a industry standard to not insulate around that type of wiring. In the world of BPI, which deals with existing housing, there's a kind of a mantra of do no harm. So like you don't want to make an energy efficiency upgrade at the risk of even potentially endangering the residents.
Our housing stock in the US is aging. People don't really expect housing stock to last a long time, but the reality is it is forced to. We aren't building new durable homes that are lasting a long time. But as we talk about the bigger issues of like climate change and needing to deal with embodied carbon, and what I'm trying to say is there's just certain things you have to spend money on in your house that aren't fun and aren't pretty.
Or necessarily immediately increase the resale value.
Yeah, but it's just the reality of homeownership, and it's a delicate dance to figure out what the most important things are. But I would say knob and tube is up there.
In our work, we often talk about like zero over time for carbon or energy. And I think that in the existing single family housing stock, we have to take a similar attitude to understanding the proper sequencing of home improvements so that people have a roadmap, not just for energy efficiency, but it's deeply tied in to durability and health and safety.
Yeah, definitely. So the next question is related, and it's actually from me. Why is it so important that I air seal and insulate my home before doing other energy efficiency improvements? For example, window replacements, etc.
I think maybe two things I would highlight. One, it's usually the intervention that has the best savings to investment ratio or return on investment, right? It's usually doesn't involve heavily invasive measures or very costly materials. I mean, it still is a skill and a difficult work, but oftentimes those interventions have the best return on investment and provide residents with immediate comfort benefits and energy savings. And usually there is a return of between 2 to 5 years or something like that for those types of things. And that's great. And that's been kind of the low hanging fruit for the industry for a long time. I think it's important that we don't just stop there. And then the second thing I would highlight is that when we talk about going further, maybe electrification or system replacement, we need to have driven down loads as far as we can. So that's reducing the heating and cooling needs of the home so that we can size the equipment more efficiently, and that can potentially be cheaper equipment as well. It's going to run less. Now, the question becomes like, there's the first level of air sealing and insulation, which is usually what is accessible in my home. Usually those are areas like an attic, if you have them, or unfinished basement. That's usually number one. But then there's usually a kind of a phase two, which would require you to go deeper. How can I address leakage in my exterior walls, at enclosed rim joists? And those things are either invasive, which you may not want to undertake them if you're living in the home, or to do them in a non-invasive manner is more costly.
Just for people who aren't as familiar with our industry jargon, you touched on defining what loads are. Mm-hmm. So when you air seal and insulate, it's one of the biggest ways to reduce the heating and cooling load of your house. So if you have more insulation in your attic, your house is going to stay warmer longer in the winter, and it's going to stay cooler longer in the summer. One of our concerns about the electrification movement is that the air sealing and insulation could get skipped in some cases. And the way your heating and cooling system works is different depending on the type of heating, particularly the heating system you have. So if you want to move with the electrification movement and reduce the carbon footprint of your house and go to a heat pump, it's really important to make sure you've air sealed and insulated first, because the way a heat pump heats your house feels very different than the way a gas or an oil furnace or a propane furnace feels when it heats your house. That gas or oil is going to put out heat at a temperature that's very high. So they're throwing heat out of the vents of your house at like 100 degrees, for example. But a heat pump, to get your house to the same temperature, is going to throw out heat at much closer to the temperature you're trying to heat to. And the way your house is warm is because that heat is held in your house for a long period of time and it builds up. So you're heating your house differently. You can be at the exact same temperature in your house, but you have to be able to hold that temperature longer. You can't just crank up that heat over and over again, or you'll end up just spending a ton of money on electric resistance heating.
That's great. I think you had mentioned windows as well, Michelle. And I think this is something that there is some misunderstanding in the market or from consumers. I think there's two conflicting things. There are people who think windows are the immediate solution and answer, and that's where you're going to focus your energy on. And I think sometimes people who go down that path get disappointed that there is a very long to maybe never get the return on that investment. On the other side of it, I think that we're so quick to emphasize air sealing and insulation because it can be relatively easy that we discount the impact of windows. So to provide some context, usually windows are much less of the exterior of our homes by percentage, right? They might be 10% of the, to use another jargon term, the envelope. So in that respect, yes, focus on the rest of the wall. Windows are an incredible weak point of the envelope. As we all kind of intuitively understand, like when you stand by a window, it feels cold. It's glass. It doesn't have a lot of insulating properties. And we're kind of limited with how much improvement we can make. Because of the cost of windows, it's going to provide a comfort benefit. It's going to drive down the loads, but it's not going to be a quick payback. It's costly materials. It's costly installation. So is this an example of why we need to focus on the low-hanging fruit first? But when the time to replace windows comes, we should be incentivizing and installing high-quality products, because that can also have a real benefit, as not just in getting a window that has a better thermal performance, but also how it's installed in the opening. So all these things matter. Most of us in this country don't have huge amounts of disposable income to drop 25 grand on high-performing windows. But if we want to make these strategic interventions in our housing stock, we have to find a way to do it.
Yeah, totally makes sense. Well, thank you, guys. Our next question is from outside this room. This is our colleague Katie in the Wilmington office.
Hi, guys. My question for you is, let's say that you are buying a home, maybe a first-time home buyer. Are there any red flags that a layperson should be looking out for that a standard inspection might not appropriately capture? And additionally, are there any things that a layperson might kind of dismiss as being less essential, but is actually worth the money or effort to correct?
Great question, Katie. To me, the most important thing to remember is that home inspectors are amazing, very skilled people, but they are generalists. So they know a little bit about everything. And it's important to realize that whenever you buy a house, there's going to be unexpected and unknown things. And you should always be thinking about what you're going to budget to be prepared for the unexpected things that come up.
I think both Rebecca and I probably have been asked by friends to come look at homes when they're purchasing them.
I, in fact, insist on it that people have me come to their house before they buy. I'm very upset with any of you that are listening to this and have bought a house without having me look. You know you regret it.
So you're talking about the entire podcast listenership?
Yes, the entire podcast listenership.
And also, I've also seen several kind of home inspection reports, and I can attest that they're pretty varied, right? Both in quality and format. And I would add that the things that I am drawn to, the things that, based on my own, where I feel my knowledge is strongest, is kind of understanding moisture management. It's critical to what we do and is often something that can get overlooked. So when I say that, I mean, like, moisture destroys homes. It shortens the life of homes. It leads to extreme unanticipated renovation and repair costs. So when I talk about this, I'm talking about how does the home shed water, both the roof, the gutter systems, the topography, site drainage, underground rain leaders. Because I think if you have really entrenched moisture issues in a home, you could be chasing those issues for decades and throwing money. But in terms of what I would look for, spend extra time walking the exterior of a home, just assessing the condition of the side of the house, the gutters, and seeing if there's any indication that maybe there's been hastily done repairs to hide things like that, like a quick paint job or like vinyl siding that's been thrown up. And then taking that through to the interior of the home, looking at underground conditions, so basement. All of this will have impacts if you do want to move towards like energy efficiency stuff. But this is like the first port of call. But understanding, like, is that foundation seeing lots of moisture? And usually there are things like efflorescence, which is like this kind of a white powdery, like crystalline deposit on the interior that indicates that there's moisture. Not necessarily, doesn't mean there's a huge problem, but it means moisture is traveling through that foundation consistently. And when it evaporates on the interior, it leaves behind that kind of white crystal deposit. So that's an indication that maybe there are surface drainage issues you need to pay attention to.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think that's a lot of really good points. And I think what I've seen in terms of horror stories is always homes that look really pretty are often hiding something, which doesn't mean you shouldn't buy a pretty house. There should always be some kind of access to an attic space. The exception may be a row home. You don't always have access to an attic space in a row home where you have a very limited attic space, for example. But I have friends who, without consulting me, purchased a home and it had no access to attic spaces, no access to a crawl space. And it turns out when we got into the issue, when they moved into the house and their kitchen was going below freezing in the winter regularly, and they had to move out of their house because they had toddlers and couldn't keep water running in their pipes because they were freezing. When I went in and looked, the contractor had closed off the attic and just drywalled over it. And their heating system was a furnace. It was running ducts into the attic that were just blowing hot air into the attic that had never been connected down to the living space. They also had uninsulated walls with water pipes running through those walls and a completely uninsulated kitchen addition with no HVAC running to it. So there was no heat running to the entire kitchen that was also uninsulated. And the way that that had passed through the home inspection was they were not areas that the home inspector could see. The home inspector could not see what was going on in the crawl space. And so he was not obligated, or she was not obligated, to look in the crawl space or make an assessment of the crawl space. The inspector could not see into the attic. And so the home inspector was not required to make any kind of judgment or evaluation of what was happening in the attic. So if there are spaces that are not accessible, it's a little bit of a red flag that you should think about and ask questions about. And it's within your rights to ask for additional inspection.
I would also add understanding the age of mechanical systems and how that impacts life expectancy. It's a really quick and easy one. Like understanding that a water heater has a life expectancy of 10 to 15 years, a boiler, maybe 30 to 40 years, maybe. When I do a walkthrough with friends who are buying a house, I quickly go to the nameplate on these systems, and then you can kind of look that up later. You can always decode the age of a system by looking at those nameplates. What I've learned about the construction industry is that oftentimes homes, the finishes are valued by the real estate market. Like, oh, it's a marble countertop, but we don't value the details of a wall assembly and the materials that went into it. And we don't value the mechanical systems, the things that are going to ensure the longevity of the home.
Definitely.
I'm Molly.
I'm Alina.
And I'm Michelle.
And here's your Mass Save Minute.
Throughout the season, I have been telling you all about the robust incentives and financing opportunities available through Mass Save for improving and optimizing your home's energy performance, increasing your comfort, and saving you money.
At New Ecology, we envision a world in which all people have access to affordable, healthy, sustainable housing and communities in which to grow and thrive. We are dedicated to working within these communities to achieve safe and affordable housing that considers the entire ecosystem, from the built environment to the natural environment to the people who inhabit these buildings every day.
That's why we're honored to have worked with Mass Save throughout the first season of Building Well. Mass Save empowers residents, businesses, and communities to make energy-efficient upgrades by offering an impressive range of services, rebates, incentives, trainings, and information to people who live and work in our local communities.
We hope that you have enjoyed listening to the first season of Building Well. We are so grateful to all of our guests for sharing their vast expertise on sustainable, resilient, equitable community development. We also hope you've learned about steps you can take and programs you can utilize to make your own home more comfortable and save on your utility bills.
And if you're interested in or work in housing, community development, sustainability, or another community-centered field, consider looking into the Mass Save Community Education Grant. This grant funding serves to increase awareness and access into energy efficiency programs, as well as engage with community-based organizations to promote energy efficiency-focused educational and culturally relevant opportunities.
A huge thank you to Mass Save for this opportunity. We learned so much this season, and we hope that all of our listeners have too.
I'm Molly with your Mass Save Minute, and I want to say thanks for an amazing season. For more information on the many available Mass Save incentives and programs, visit masssave.com. MASSSAVE.com. Remember, our well-being is intertwined with energy efficiency. Get involved, learn more, and make a difference. By making energy-efficient choices, you're not only saving money, but also contributing to a healthier community for future generations.
Thanks.
All right, guys, are you ready for the lightning round?
Woo!
All right, so the lightning round is just a bunch of short questions that maybe not have short answers. Our first question is from Adam in our Boston office.
Hey, Alex. Hi, Rebecca. Does putting that plastic over the windows in the winter really help with energy efficiency?
It does. Yeah, I mean, it's not glamorous, but it does. And I guess, if you feel the need to do that, it's probably an indication you have pretty old windows. Plastic can do two things. It can block out air leakage through those panes, especially if you have an old double hung window. And then it's not rocket science with like triple and double pane windows. They're trapped air between those layers. And doing this plastic and doing it properly, I've done a lot of these. I used to, back in the day, my old boss used to make me do it for her house. So I got really good at it. But like essentially by putting that layer of plastic, you've kind of mimicked an extra pane of glass. Trapping that air, like that's how insulation works. Yeah, it does work to an extent.
It's best to get the shrink wrap stuff that you use like a hair dryer and you seal to the window. You want to make it tight. You want a pillow of air in there to be your thermal break or your thermal insulation. Energy Star has a page on how to do this. Like it genuinely does work. So yes, the answer is definitely yes.
All right. Our next question is from our colleague Justin out of our Baltimore office.
Hey, Rebecca and Alex. This is your coworker Justin in Baltimore. My question for you is about heat pump water heaters. I'm interested in putting one in my house, but I'm concerned about the noise level because our best space for it is our laundry room, but it's adjacent to kind of a family room. So I'm curious if that's going to be objectionable or if we can deal with the noise level.
Excellent question, Justin. I have a heat pump water heater in my house, and it is located in my basement underneath the guest room, which also happens to be my office. And I can hear the heat pump water heater when it's on. If you were considering a location like a laundry room that's next to your family room, I think you should look very closely at the audible decibel range of your unit. It seems in the water heater industry that everyone's talking about audible decibels, which is decibels that people can hear with the human ear. And the average seems to be around 65 audible decibels. And that is about the volume of a normal conversation. There are some that go significantly quieter than that. You can go all the way down into the 40s of the audible decibels. You could also add an intake and an outtake duct so that you can kind of move the sound away. I think they're best situated in a basement or a little bit farther away from a living space.
I know that they quote like 55 to 60 decibels, like Rebecca said, which is supposed to be the same as like a dishwasher or a refrigerator when the compressor's running. The only other thing I would emphasize is heat pump water heaters often have like a certain amount of programming that you can utilize. So they don't run all the time. So you could essentially block out hours. So you could make it so that it's running when everyone's at school or at work. They're great, but I think you need to be cognizant of sound.
You could consider soundproofing between that laundry room and your family room before installing it. So you would be less likely to hear it in the family room.
Make it its own little studio.
Yes, exactly.
Great, thank you. All right, our next question is from Lisa out of our Baltimore office.
Hi, Rebecca and Alex. My question for you is, what is the highest impact, lowest cost energy improvement you have made on your home or a friend's home in your career?
LEDs, then air sealing and insulation. I think that's kind of it.
Yeah. I mean, we're always learning in this industry. When I bought an abandoned row home and left my job to renovate it, I knew a decent amount about energy efficiency. And I look back on it, I wish I'd done some things differently. And I've been able to implement some of those things on other people's homes. I did help renovate a friend's home. And we were able to do the best type of roof retrofit for a row home, which involves having continuous above deck insulation. It's good for the building, durability, and it was really fun.
Nice. All right.
So that's it for the lightning round. The next section is general knowledge. So we have some questions from folks about where they live.
Cool. And our first question is from Michelle, who is out of our Boston office.
Hi, Alex and Rebecca. My question is, my apartment is always hot no matter the outdoor temperature. It's on the second floor of 3 floors, and we leave the windows open even in the winter. So I'm wondering why this is the case and what I can do about it in my unit.
There's a lot of unknowns here, but it doesn't surprise me. I'm going to go on a limb and guess that they have a hydronic system in this building. It's not uncommon to see that kind of undesirable stratification, in part due to stack effect. It's dependent on a number of factors. One, how are the thermostats configured? How is the system zoned? But you can often see stratification because of stack effects, or the units higher up in the building are baked out. Whereas if the system isn't zoned independently, it's not great. And you end up in the scenarios that Michelle is talking about. And then the question becomes, how are the utilities metered in that building? Only other little tidbit I would add is that I learned a couple of years ago that oftentimes in larger apartment buildings, in tenement buildings, the systems were designed to force residents to open windows. To blast heat is a kind of a health thing, as a way to create ventilation before we understood ventilation, especially, during winter times when respiratory sicknesses might be going on. This is kind of the crude ways we've managed heat and ventilation in old housing, and it's not the way we want to approach it today.
Yeah, there's so many things about being a renter that you cannot control necessarily. And it depends on your housing situation, the actual equipment in your building. There are scenarios where there are things like thermostatic controls that could be added to a radiator if that's the way your unit is heated. Who pays the bills makes a really big difference in who is motivated to resolve the issue. So if you're paying the bills, you're motivated to resolve the issue, but it might be the owner that needs to do something about it. And if they're not putting any money into the utility bills, there's not a financial incentive for the owner to do anything about that. We can learn a lot more, and Alex and I are happy to have a conversation with you about the actual details of your building and what might be possible. Yeah, it's kind of a challenging question.
It's a good one, though.
That's our whole goal. One of our enormous goals in the work we do at New Ecology is to prevent that exact situation. so many people live in rental housing and they have the right to be comfortable and healthy.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that. And Michelle, you heard it here. If you want more information, reach out to Alex or Rebecca. Our next question comes from Michael out of our Boston office.
Hey, Alex and Rebecca, it's Michael here. My question today is, what can tenants do if they want to save on utility bills?
I think about this a lot. The first thing I'll talk about is that there are low-hanging fruit which falls on the occupant's responsibility, on the responsibility of a landlord. And I think we as a society would benefit from being more knowledgeable about systems in our home and how they all interact and what the cost implications and health implications of all these things are. A lot of utility programs have kind of free giveaway programs. Every utility and state is different. Here in Maryland, we have a quick home energy checkup, which renters are eligible for. There'll be some educational materials provided explaining heating and cooling usually constitute this much of a utility bill. Here's lighting and appliances. And I think that's really valuable information for people to understand and can be empowering. And oftentimes that comes along with free lighting upgrades and replacements, which can be great. We're doing a pretty good job in this country of moving to LEDs. 10, 15 years ago, there was a lot of replacing incandescents and even CFLs. But now I think LEDs are becoming the norm. And lighting is, I'm going to say 10%. That's the average, I think, for residential consumption. And then, other things that residents might be responsible for. So appliances potentially. But to the previous question, renters, they're in a tight position in terms of what they can control. And so I think it moves into a space of understanding the dynamic between tenant and landlord responsibilities. And it is useful, I think, to provide some context. So I pulled this off of RMI's website. That's the Rocky Mountain Institute. It's a nonprofit that does a lot of research around electrification and energy efficiency. This is a quote from that article, and it says, rental buildings consume on average 20% more energy per square foot than owner-occupied buildings. Much of this disparity stems from the so-called split incentive problem. Landlords have little incentive to improve home energy efficiency when they do not pay energy bills. That's something that Rebecca said just a few moments ago. And tenants have little incentive to make improvements to a home when they may not be present to reap the full benefits of that investment. In addition, these poorly performing homes are disproportionately occupied by low-income residents, people of color, and other underserved communities, the constituents who can least afford to pay exorbitant energy bills. I think we at New Ecology understand this intuitively. It's key to our work, and we often get to work on the renovation of larger buildings, but a lot of people live in more unregulated housing. I'm really interested by different attitudes to this around the country and around the world, because I think how rental housing is regulated, there are usually minimum habitability standards that are about life safety. And some of those do back up to energy efficiency, right? An unmaintained heating system could be unsafe. It's also very probably inefficient. So tenants understanding how and when their equipment should be serviced would be a good empowering thing for residents to understand. That article I mentioned does kind of reference a few kind of initiatives around the country. I think it's an exciting thing to look at, both for renters' rights kind of advocates, but also for our decarbonization efforts. There's a huge percentage of our housing stock in the country, and if it remains kind of off the map, nothing's going to happen, and we have to address it.
I will also add, Michael, if you want to do something right now, LEDs, maybe some plastic on your windows. Maybe aerators, if you could do faucet aerators. You can also do smart thermostat setbacks, learn about what kind of system you have and what the smartest thermostat setback could be.
Right.
See, you guys aren't going to get us to shut up.
Okay. We have only a few questions left. Our next question is from Todd, who is a project manager in our Boston office.
Hey, Alex and Rebecca. So, as you know, it's really important to make sure the investments you're making on your home or property are beneficial and impactful in the long term. Do you have any tips for sussing out which contractors know their stuff when it comes to building science and quality interventions? How do I know I have the right person for the job?
That's a great question. I think it depends on the scope that you're looking at. I think there are ways to assess the knowledge and interest of a mechanical contractor. For instance, their understanding of high performance systems. You might be able to look at their website, see what credentials they have, ask what type of systems they typically spec. If it's a GC, maybe you look for them to be BPI qualified. There are people who have straddled the worlds of general contracting and home performance. And what else would you add to that, Rebecca?
I would add that there is the old adage to always get 3 estimates.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you learn a lot from having multiple estimates and multiple contractors out. and talking to them. It's hard to get 3 estimators to come out to your house. It's hard to get contractors to show up sometimes. But I think having more than one contractor out to your house, particularly 3, making sure that they're licensed, which seems like it would be really basic, but it's not. Just make sure those contractors are licensed and insured. So 3 estimates, licensed and insured. And then I think Alex posed some really good questions, asking them what type of systems they install. And people that are passionate about doing their job right, I feel like when I talk to contractors, I can tell who those people are. Like some people are really good at like the salesy side of things and like going through that kind of conversation. But I had a contractor out, for example, to look at sealing my driveway a few weeks ago. And I have never heard someone speak so passionately about paving and sealing. And I was like, this guy is so passionate. That's not an item that needs building science. But if you find a person who cares deeply about their work, they're going to be more open to your building science suggestions. There's also no world in which you don't have to do your own research and learn a little bit on your own.
Yeah.
You're going to have to do some research to know what to ask for. You could find a company to do a really good home energy audit on your home, which helps as well. But you're going to have to be involved. You're going to have to put in the legwork to ask for multiple estimates. You're going to have to put in the legwork to research the contractors, and you're going to have to put in the legwork to know a little bit about what you're talking about, or ask people who do know what they're talking about to help you.
There's always unknowns, and I have a great respect for contractors who are upfront about like naming the unknowns, because typically, depending on the type of project, there are things that are going to come up, and their ability to anticipate that is kind of a form of building science.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a theme that we've seen come up over and over and over again on this podcast is if you want something done the right way and the safe way, you have to do so much research beforehand.
So true.
Thank you for that. And we're actually coming to the end. This is our last call-in question. So this is Paul out of our Boston office with our final question.
Hi, Alex and Rebecca. This is Paul. My question is, what is the one thing that you have learned from your work that you wish you could implement in your own home, but you cannot? And what is the reason that you cannot implement?
And maybe this is maybe in the future we can have a row home dedicated podcast, but I have row homes on the brain. I live in one. Mostly got renovated it myself with some help from trade partners. When it was down to a shell, I wish I had done a better job of insulating exterior masonry walls. I think at the time I was very afraid because I knew enough to know what I didn't know. And therefore I thought the best course of action was to do less. But now I know how to do that properly. And because I think the industry has learned a lot in the last 10 years. A lot of our historic masonry buildings were built to be uninsulated. They have a lot of thermal mass. So if you get the heat cranking, you can feel quite cozy, but they have pretty terrible thermal performance. When you have limited space, a lot of people recommend spray foam. And spray foam can be great in certain applications, but if you don't understand that wall's exposure to moisture, at the time it made me anxious. And I'll just also add that what I love about this work is sometimes it's combining the old knowledge with the new. The way we built 100 years ago, or even thousands of years ago, there's a lot of real wisdom in that. Old masonry buildings use lime mortar, which is a really amazing product. Unlike current cement, it actually breathes or it diffuses moisture better than like current cement. It's also, when it's uniform, it's an air barrier. And so I wish I had understood that and I had restored that interior plaster layer on the inside of the masonry. And I know that I alluded to many things there, but that's something I wish I could go back and do because now I have drywall and I'm not planning on demoing those walls anytime soon.
My answer will be I haven't owned my house very long. And so I have so many things I want to do, but budget is my limiting factor. And knowing too much is my limiting factor as well. So I have a barely insulated attic. I live in a rancher built in the 50s. Knowing what I know about healthy homes and energy efficiency, I really would like an energy recovery ventilator in my house, or at least a ventilating dehumidification system, because we're in the mid-Atlantic and we have a lot of issues with humidity. And so there's a budget cost to that I'm not at a point to deal with at the moment. So I'm dealing with other things until I can slowly chip away at that. Take some time to build up the resources to be able to do things. For example, Alina getting rid of her knob and tube. Full circle.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys for answering everybody's questions. Thank you so much for doing this and being the guest on the first of its kind. This was so awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
So many great questions, and thank you guys for compiling it.
Thanks for being here.
Cool.
Fun.
Thank you guys.
Thank you to our guests, Alex and Rebecca, for joining us on today's episode. We learned so much. For more information on what we spoke about today, the show notes and transcript are available at newecology.org/buildingwell-podcast. You can find New Ecology on Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube at New Ecology Inc. See you on the next episode.
This episode was made possible by the Mass Save Community Education Grant.
The Season 1 Building Well Podcast Committee at New Ecology is led and organized by Alina Michaelevich and Michelle Moran, with Molly Kraft and Michael Abdelmessi.